First, I'm going to ask each one of the panelists to give a brief introduction on themselves and their role and what they have to contribute to the discussion here. And then we'll break into some questions that we've discussed that we thought would be a good way to kick things off. But we really want to get your questions too. So we highly encourage you to be thinking of questions that you'd like to ask and direct to one or more of the panelists here. And you know, we'd be delighted to have interactive discussions that way. So once again, I'm Christine Hertzog. I'm the Managing Director of the Smart Grid Library and SGL Partners, information services and consulting firm. And I'm delighted to have a really high-class panel of participants here who can bring really wonderful, in-depth experiences and perspectives to our discussion about smart home and smart consumer. So Patty, why don't you start with a brief introduction of yourself and your background.
All right. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Patty Durand, and I'm the Executive Director of the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative. We are a 501c3 nonprofit focused on consumer education and research. And the mission that I like to say, it's easy to remember, is our goal is to advance a consumer-friendly and consumer-safe smart grid. And we do that through collaboration, through listening to consumers and reporting back to industry stakeholders what we know about consumers, and through research.
Thank you, Patty. Drew.
Hi, I'm Drew Johnston. I am the lead at the Central Texas Fuel Independence Project. We're a public-private initiative that looks to expand the footprint of electric and natural gas vehicles through informational and market leadership across our 10-county region between Austin and San Antonio. So that requires the I-35 corridor, the Hill Country, Blacklands, but also two major urban centers. And essentially getting the whole region on the same sheet music around electric vehicles and natural gas means intersecting energy, transportation, ERCOT, Railroad Commission, all your different types of utilities, your different municipal codes, your automakers, your education and workforce development, and building that sinew, that connective tissue across the region so that we're more fully equipped with the tools and resources to prepare for our own future. That's fuel independent. Yeah.
Thank you, Drew.
Roughly that.
Okay, thank you. May, how about a little background?
Hi, my name is May Shibata. I'm a co-founder at ThinkEco, which is an energy efficiency and Internet of Things technology company in New York. And in that role, I've worked with some of my fellow panelists over here. More recently, I took on a CEO position with the Energy Agency, which is a marketing and communications company focused solely on the energy sector, where the vision really is to get from strategy, whether it's corporate strategy or program strategy, what have you, all the way through to implementation of creatives, of social media deployment, whatever the marketing and communications needs are. So I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you, May. Excuse me, Chris, how about a little background on your role and Tendril?
Sure. Hi there, everyone. My name is Chris Black. I am the COO and CTO for Tendril. Tendril is a leading provider of energy management solutions for energy service providers. So we partner with energy service providers across utilities and retailers and those who are providing energy services into the home to implement large-scale programs across energy efficiency, demand response, customer satisfaction, new revenues, and we've been in business. We've been around since 2004, so kind of one of the older players in this space, and happy to be here.
Thank you, Chris. And Bert, how about a little background that you can provide with your perspectives being part of the Pecan Street project?
Yes, my name is Bert Haskell. I'm the CTO for Pecan Street. We're a nonprofit that is publicly and privately funded. We collect very granular energy data. We have the world's largest residential and light commercial energy database. We do a lot of big data analytics. We do a lot of machine-to-machine communication. And we also do systems integration research for new types of energy appliances.
Thank you. So let's get started with a few questions, and it's kind of a warm-up for you audience members to come forward with your questions as well. So I'll start with you, May. There are some significant differences between the traditional utility sector and the consumer sector. Given your experiences with a foot in each camp, what are some of the most important distinctions, and how can these differences be managed, mitigated, or leveraged to ensure that consumers are getting what they need and want from utilities, and vice versa?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest differences is that in the utility sector, a lot of the improvements and changes happen with regulation. So the time cycles associated with that are just much slower, and they're sort of in a stepwise fashion. Whereas I think in the consumer world, when we're dealing with people, and especially in today's world where everything is about instant gratification, it's more about a conversation economy where, people want regular interaction with the companies that they work with, or that they buy products from. And this conversation economy is this idea where every relevant interaction, you're able to, as the company, put some money into a piggy bank. And when you need the customer to do something or to really interact with you in a meaningful manner, you get to take money out of that piggy bank because you've earned it, so if you will, right? So it's more continuous, more fluid. And to reconcile those two halves is difficult. We've seen that a lot at ThinkEco as well, where a lot of the demand response programs that we would run were based off of PSC mandates, which happen at best on an annual basis. But our customers need interaction, even though it's a summer program, pretty much every month in order for the program to stay relevant. So what we did there was we branded it completely separately. So we called it Cool NYC, which was a partnership between a utility, Con Ed, as well as us, ThinkEco. So it was it was definitely a separate thing, and we earned a lot of equity on that platform. Where if in the wintertime people had a hard time getting to work because there was a snowstorm, we would say, "Hey guys, I hope you got to work today, okay?" Even though we're a summer program. And then when we won a marketing award for the program, we basically shared the wealth back with our Cool NYC members and said, "Hey, thanks to you guys, we won an award. We want to award one of you guys an iPad for all of your efforts. Send us an email about what you like about the program, and we'll, award one winner." So that sort of ongoing dialogue, I think, helps to bridge the gap. But business as usual, there's such a fundamental difference in sort of the, I guess to use an operations term, cycle time between utility changes and what consumers expect from the companies that they interact with.
Chris, I see that you're nodding your head a lot there. Are you
Completely disagree. We see it exactly the same way. When you think about kind of the normal interactions in a kind of regulated market, there's kind of two interactions that any consumer has with their utility, and they're both bad. It's you have questions or complaints about your bill, or your power's out. And so, when you're trying to do a kind of a motivational kind of behavior change program, you need to create more of a dialogue and a relationship. And if you don't have that, then the program is going to either not be successful or have a pretty short tail. And so you really do have to create that relationship with them in order to make sure that these programs succeed.
And Bert, of course, you've been spending a lot of time working with specific groups of consumers. Do you practice some of the same things that you're hearing from May and from Chris in terms of that constant outreach, ability to satisfy that instant gratification in some way or shape or form?
Yes, we kind of model our interactions very much like more of a consumer electronics company, and we're always asking people to install new instruments or new devices in their home. In one case, we gave people some Nest thermostats so that we could collect data for our research. And so we have to, if there's something they don't like, they'll take it out. It's all opt-in. So we have to be very attuned to what people actually like and what fits with their lifestyle, or it's not going to happen.
Interesting. And Patty, of course, in your role, you spend a lot of time working with what consumers want and the ramifications of electricity policy decisions. If you had one policy change to suggest that could be implemented in all 50 states, maybe not easy to do, but in an ideal world, yes, what would that policy change of your dreams be?
So I knew this question was coming, and I I still find it hard to answer because there are actually two changes that I would like to see, not just one. One change I think that's really important would be to have rate reform or have rates reflect the actual cost of energy. The way it's priced right now, where it's levelized, so that when energy is really expensive, the rate's the same for the consumer, and when energy is really cheap, the rate's is the same for the consumer, is really a problem for consumers to ever engage with their utility for any program. So utilities are rolling out programs, they find low enrollment, and that's because there's apathy on the part of consumers, and that's because consumers are really disempowered and really don't know what's happening with energy prices, and they have no idea that expensive decisions for running peaker plants or hitting peak are being integrated into the cost of electricity, and they're paying those increased costs. So that's one big change that, if I could have anything I wanted. The other one is I'd really like to see a new set of regulations such that utilities can innovate. There are a lot of sticks and very few carrots in energy regulations, with the PSCs in all 50 states. We have to have reliability, we have to have low price, and right now that leaves no room for innovation. So if I could be king for a day and I could do anything I wanted, having a regulatory structure such that utilities are able to partner with vendors are able to offer solutions to consumers, everyone benefits. Yes, reliability needs to remain a mandate, but there's still a lot of room for innovation that just can't happen the way regulation occurs now. And I would really like to see a new, maybe a dual structure or some other way that utilities and vendors can innovate and there's no downside for utilities, so that a lot of innovation can flourish that right now just cannot. And we heard a lot about that during the keynote talk from Wellinghoff and Doyle just now. We heard their struggles, and we heard Wellinghoff say, we really need to find a way for innovation to take place, for regulatory structures to support on the demand side as well as the wholesale market, on the retail market.
Okay. Drew, I'd like to ask you that same question. If you were king for a day and there was one policy change you could, implement across, what would it be?
There is no silver bullet, so I don't know anyone that has the right answer for that. I do think, I think in general, utilities have done a disservice to the public by focusing on technology. They have not focused on the human interaction with technology. And I think on another part of this, we have consumers that don't understand that there's probably a most optimal setting for them to eco-fit their home. That starts with weatherizing your home, then goes to energy efficiency, then it goes through appliances, and then it goes to your whole building envelope, and then it goes to renewable energy. And I think that's a more suitable approach than a lot of options that we have on the table. I don't think that it's the utility's place to decide that. I think the road to prosperity is paved with voluntary decision-making. But I will say that there were a few things from Steve Wozniak's speech yesterday that I really found powerful. The number one thing was, as far as investment, invest in what is good and changes people's lives. And as far as innovation, he said, people that smile more often than frown will find more partners. New ideas need friends. Getting prepared. I just got an email earlier today. So my group, we're looking at electric vehicles at the home, and we're looking at multifamily very seriously, and we're looking at office place very seriously for the whole region. And so we've been working with all the necessary stakeholders to ramp up level 1 multifamily installs. Because the White House has even said, look, we are not doing enough in multifamily. We're all this investment, and where is that? A lot of utilities don't even have a department or a key accounts manager that deals with multifamily, even though it's half their population. So for me, the counterintuitive thing would be, the intuitive thing would be to focus on this space, find very affordable solutions for it that touch a lot of different needs and a lot of different groups, and build in education, facilitated education, so that maybe I'm not the right answer for you, but I know the right answer, and it's worth the 2 extra phone calls to make sure that you get that information. And once you build that good faith and trust, I think that's really what it takes. Bert once said at a meeting, actually at one of the first Industry Advisory Council meetings ever of Pecan Street, he said there comes a time where industry needs to consort, and that's what consortia is for. And that's very true. Industry needs to get together. We have too much of this dynamic of, it was so interesting. The first thing you said were, Chris, the first things you said were 2 issues that people have. They call about power being out or to complain about their bill. And this natural animosity in that sort of sentence is sort of what the problem is that there is opportunity for a social compact. That is not a lowest common denominator relationship between a utility and the customer. There's an opportunity to actually say, look, we have aspirational goals and you do too. Where do we align with that? Let's work forward and build on that, you know? So.
Okay. Now, May, that same question, but slightly different, because it sounds like you are actually finding a way to make things work with Con Ed in New York in terms of, finding a way to get around some of the regulatory obstacles. And I'd like if you could just, talk a little bit about that and, whether or not that might serve as maybe a model that could be used in other parts of the country.
Yeah, let me answer that a little bit more broadly. I think what we have found is that, working very closely with utilities, their core business is about safety and reliability. And we just felt that that was so lost on the end consumer. And, from a marketing standpoint, a reliability message really is difficult to convey because there's very little feel-good associated with that. And so what we were trying to do was to bring back that feel-good in a different way, but still emphasizing the fact that reliability was at the core of everything that the utility, stood for. And therefore, when you do a demand response event, people know why they're participating. Granted, in New York, it's a little bit easier because we've had a blackout before. But, once you get people to appreciate the reliability in their own way, it made it a lot easier. And, I was thinking about this yesterday in one of the sessions where, one of the analogies in my mind, it's an odd one, but one of the analogies in my mind is Coca-Cola, right? So they have not changed their recipe in forever. And when they tried, disastrous, right? When they tried to change their packaging for a winter campaign, disastrous. So from that, people want that reliability of if they pick up a Coke, it's going to taste like Coke. Nothing else. It is Coke. But where Coca-Cola does a beautiful job, because it's a consumer brand, is it does all the stuff around it, like Coke Rewards, all the advertising that they do, so the consumer feels good about taking that one reliable thing that they can trust. Same thing here with utilities. When you get a bill that's too high, you go crazy. When there's brownout or blackout, you go crazy because that reliability is gone. So people put faith in that reliability. How you convey that, I think, is the trick to making that relationship work better.
Nike, just do it. Same
Just
kind
do
of
it.
thing.
Exactly.
And you're able to do it across digital, sort of your multimedia digital presence, but also in the thing that you buy.
Yes.
You are able to do it, whether it's the fuel bracelet or whatever.
Exactly. So when a brand is promoted or stands upon reliability and performance, those.
But the
brands to
uniformity
look
of
at.
messaging is
Exactly.
essential
It's
to that, and
absolutely.
the message informing all of your product development.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But completely agree. But you're talking about something completely foreign to most regulated utilities, right? Yeah, I mean, they are. Coke, Nike are marketing agencies, right? They happen to sell a product, but they're marketing companies, pure and simple. Regulated utilities aren't, right? They are selling electrons and don't know how to engage with their customers.
You're talking to a guy that works at Austin Energy.
Yeah, exactly.
We take our community so seriously, and we trust them so seriously.
But that's, I think, there's an 80-20, and, you may be in the 20.
Fair enough. No, I'm down with that. That's
I
okay.
think that's changing a lot, especially as costs continue to rise and more and more are dropping off the grid, essentially, as they're putting on rooftop solar, and they need to figure out ways of filling those gaps, and filling out ways of filling those gaps is providing additional products and services, especially as the regulatory environment changes. I think Austin Energy is really progressive in this thinking. A lot aren't.
And
so
it's also different being an investor-owned utility versus a muni versus
exactly
a
right.
co-op.
Or a
They're
muni.
different.
exactly.
So
Or a small muni.
taking a cue from, again, other industries, if you're heavily regulated and can't, one way to do it is through partnerships, right? So that was what the Cool NYC program that we did was all about. I mean, if you think about, banks being heavily regulated, you have all these co-branded credit cards, same sort of idea where you could bring in perks from other sectors and still achieve your goal of, getting people to, use your credit card or in this case, use electricity with your utility. So, just ideas from other areas.
So one of the things that we've done is a lot of research around what consumers know and what they want. And we've identified clearly that segmentation makes a big difference. We know that almost every other industry segments their customer database, their customers into different segments or groupings. The utility industry has not done that, with the exception of maybe saying these are C&I customers, these are residential customers, but beyond that, nothing. So we've done some research. We actually published it in February on the utilities that are out in front in terms of segmentation. And those utilities that are out in front are showing increased customer satisfaction, increased trust with their utility, increased program enrollment, and increased profit margins.
And probably direct causal relationships between some of those relationships, between those intersections. So if they participate in an energy efficiency program, chances are they also contacted them about an ECAD audit, all the other things about a Nest, and finding out if even if it's something they can do, if there's a portal for an app.
Yeah, so there are different, we're not yet at the point where utilities are taking those segments and saying, okay, I'm now going to create a program around this group of segments. Instead, the few utilities that are doing segmentation that are actually utilizing the output from their segmentation studies are creating messages around their already in place programs. But the next generation of segmentation is to take those segments and then create programs for those segments. And again, we get into regulatory barriers because in many cases, IOUs have to offer the exact same thing to every single member and have the exact same message. They're not allowed to have different messaging. They're not allowed, and so they're held back from seeing good program enrollment by the regulatory barriers. And then in many cases—
What states do that? I haven't heard of that before.
the barriers?
Yeah, no. Basically, don't allow you to segment. Wait, are there whole states
they allow
that
you
don't
to
allow
segment,
that?
but they don't allow the utility to offer different messages.
And this
to
happens in
different
whole
groups.
states?
In the utilities who have the whole state as a territory. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, Texas, you guys are in another world here.
In so many ways.
We stand on our own 2 feet. If we can do it, we can't hide you.
So just to wrap up that point is the result is that there's low program enrollment, and then the inference is people just don't care. Look, no one enrolled in our programs, when that's not the case at all.
So what I've been hearing a little bit so far is if, an ideal perspective or an ideal approach would be that if you are a utility and you're working with, partners to do outreach to consumers, especially residential consumers, it would be great if we had more carrots and less stick. It would be great if we could do more holistic approaches rather than, and not holistic meaning universal, but holistic meaning, we can segment and we can find the segment that is maybe EV plus, has solar on the rooftop and things like that, and they get a different program. And then having an ability to provide messaging that can also be rather targeted. Those would be 3 things that would be ideals if we could change the world and start making some things go in a more positive direction. Bert, it seems like you're in a perfect position where you have that opportunity to really be that living laboratory because you get to try different things. Are there any things that you tried that you thought would work that didn't work? And, were there some good lessons learned from any failures?
Well, one project that we did that was disappointing was we worked with a large global technology company. We tried to install some residential energy storage, and we couldn't get it permitted. There was no process in place. No one knew what to do with it. So I think one of, in terms of policy, one of the most important things a utility can do is to streamline the permitting, look into these new classes of devices, understand them. A single point of permitting would be awesome. If there was a way to connect to a quality of service by the grid provider and then be able to remotely disconnect from either side of the meter.
Would any of this be like fire marshal regulations and stuff like that? Just because like the state would be like, hey, we don't know what this will do, what this will cause?
Yeah, there are those issues as well. I mean, that all has to
So
be
getting
encompassed.
certifications in place so that people are equipped with the information, tools, and equipment to actually test and validate these new systems in the home, that would be important, right?
Yes, it would.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the
surprised-
utility can help with that, but it can't steer that, right? Like, I guess it's sort of, that's what I'm thinking
Well,
about is,
the first step is to have a single point of permitting that
That's a very
can
good
be
point.
remotely shut off from either side of the meter. So if I don't want to be on the grid, I can turn it off. If you need to take me off the grid, you can turn it off. You don't need to worry about whether my solar panels are producing energy because
Yeah.
you can conclusively disconnect me from the grid.
that's interesting.
Now, being part of Austin Energy, within their footprint, it seems like this would be a much less complicated problem to solve.
There's
because
still institutions.
you-
I mean, we still
but
have
you're
inertia.
reporting into the
everything's
same,
perfect.
management structure ultimately.
Oh, no, they're
So-
separate. They are totally private. Pecan Street is totally private, right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
But
Austin,
we
I mean,
we
Austin
collaborate.
Energy, is part of the city, and so
Yeah.
the folks that are responsible for developing permits and the processes, those organizations report into the same infrastructure,
It's still
right?
complicated. It's still a city department of the city of Austin. You're absolutely right. And the point of a single point of permitting, coming from an urban planning background, and my thesis was in consumer behavior of energy efficiency programs. I think that's a really good point.
Let me clarify that.
That's
I'm
good.
not talking about a single government age. I'm talking about a single piece of hardware that you permit that people can then plug solar panels, batteries, EV chargers into. So, and then that
Gotcha.
becomes streamlined and well understood. And so we're embarking on a project now with the folks from the Netherlands to
Yeah.
demonstrate some of those activities. But I think that's the biggest. You have to embrace that. There's a certain amount of uncertainty on the behalf of utilities around what does that mean if people can go off grid, or what does it mean if we let people go off grid. But I think that has to be embraced. That's really the biggest stumbling point right now is that uncertainty.
Do you think standards and protocols agencies know what you guys are doing? Sometimes I tell people about what Pecan Street is doing, and folks are like, oh my gosh, how do I get in touch with them? We didn't know that, but we're in the middle of a process that evaluates exactly that. How about we're talking about messaging before. How does that, like, how can you guys provide that guidance and counsel on, hey, we're actually looking at these things right now, so that the relevant groups are, because you guys work with so many different people. How do you manage that? Does that make sense? Like, sort of, how do you get to the right people knowing that you guys are evaluating this stuff?
Right. We do
Hustle.
that. Yeah. We have a lot of industrial participants. We're engaged with San Diego, with Boulder. We've got proposals out to other utility service districts. And we're just, people engage with us and they learn what we're doing. So
Because the standards really matters in that field.
I'd like to, take the focus a little bit broader than just what's going on in Austin or in Texas here, and talk a little bit more about what's going on in some of the other states. So, Chris, I'd like to turn this question to you for starters, and then get a couple of other folks to get involved here. But smart home is something that everyone's been talking about. It seems that it's a dream that we keep chasing. And there's so many different things that need to be accomplished. Bert was just talking about a couple of the potential issues that could arise anywhere. Do you see if there's a difference in your experiences at Tendril between what's going on in terms of deployment of smart home types of technologies in a regulated state versus a deregulated market? Sure. Can you give us a compare and contrast there?
Yeah, is it possible to maybe add on to this last answer before
sure,
I go there?
sure.
Because I think this is an important topic, especially for the title of the panel. The question was kind of what has been tried and failed? And at the risk of being controversial, and certainly with full respect to my neighbors, I think almost everything we've done in the smart home has failed to date. I mean, on mass scale, we've tried a lot of things, science projects, lots of little devices talking with various mesh networking protocols, joining the meter, maybe not joining the meter. It's all science projects, and it's science projects because the kit costs a lot. There was funding and stimulus dollars in order to kind of play, but not enough to do mass scale. The marketing part of that wasn't really done well, and so the value proposition to the end users wasn't really understood. And so if you look at kind of all of what we've been doing across a lot of companies, us included for a long time, that was kind of our DNA. We don't do it anymore, but I think largely all of what we have all done in the smart home has largely failed. I think that's changing now that there's new classes of devices that are consumer focused, that people are opting to put into their home that have real value proposition. But the whole age of having a gateway in the home that does nothing else other than talk to other devices that they don't really maybe want or understand the value of, with no real kind of primary function in and of itself, I think is kind of over. And so that doesn't mean the connected home is over, right? I think we're now finally to a point where it's becoming real because there's other devices, there's other consumer class devices that have real utility that people really understand, they want in their homes, and those things don't have to necessarily talk to each other, and you can centralize the intelligence to do orchestration across them. And so I think we're reaching a point where there's real consumer value and kind of moving beyond science projects because there were stimulus dollars in order to do it. So, I think these guys are powering a lot of that, but I think to date it's been science projects.
That is the most honest insight I've heard at ETS yet. I really applaud you for saying that out loud, because but underneath that is the marketable asset. Underneath that is that opportunity to innovate and create the force multiplier that's
here
out
now.
there. And we are, and I agree with you, we're at that convergence of a communication and energy regime. Right. That's a very good point.
I think we're sort of there and we're sort of not, right? So since the time you guys started, I mean, thankfully the cost of deployment has probably come down tenfold. Right. I think it needs to come down 20-fold for it to really be accessible to everybody. But at least that barrier has been overcome, which is fantastic. Yeah. The barrier that hasn't been overcome, though, because this is a smart home panel and we're in the energy sector, and it's sort of, for me, the elephant in the room is who owns the customer relationship when the home is smart? And I think that's why everybody's trying to get into it, and they're trying to own as much of it as possible. But at the end of the day, like the conversation here, unless people are partnering, it ain't gonna happen, right? And from a customer standpoint, everything in their life is getting smarter, and it's not like you get from not a smart home to a smart home like this. I mean, it's all gradual. So the customer relationship is gradually changing, and how you kind of stay relevant as a vendor or a utility, I think that's where we're going to make this work, is people need to figure out what part of that relationship is theirs. And then we can all play nicely, and then it would actually happen.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And I think that, and then kind of going into your actual question that you asked me.
Absolutely.
Who's going to win, regulated or deregulated space in the connected home? I think that, so I'll answer the question, but then I'll kind of change the question. I think the deregulated folks are in a better position to do so because the regulatory environment is a little bit looser for them. They can sell additional products and services. Many of them understand marketing and consumer relationships much more, and so they have a better opportunity probably to win that. That being said, I don't think it's regulated or deregulated question. I think it's whomever can have a relationship with the customer and provide real kind of valued products and services to them. So Comcasts of the world, the telcos and the cable cos and the solar companies of the world, who people are coming to you because they want your product, and you now have a footprint in the home, and you can provide other kinds of intelligent things that are solving real problems in their lives. Those are the people who are going to win. Google acquired Nest, probably not because they wanted a thermostat, right? They wanted a window into the home and a hub that they can do other smart things around, and so I think it's those kinds of folks that are providing real consumer-focused products and services that other things can piggyback on top of, that are solving real problems for real people.
And I do think that the example that you cited of Google with Nest is instructive, because they had tried and failed with their power meter solution because it wasn't easy enough.
Right.
It
wasn't only that, it was also they had problems getting access to the data.
Mm-hmm,
Utilities weren't just going to open their doors and let Google in to access their consumer data.
Mm-hmm. And also for a lot of meter companies, they have managed service contracts that essentially are paying the meter read So it's like, well, we only do it once a month because we don't want to pay for X number of meters to be read.
Right.
You know, we talk about the connected home. I have a Nest and I have an electric vehicle, and I'm really into these technologies and into saving energy, and I'm really into green energy, and I think climate change is a huge problem that needs to be addressed 10 minutes ago. But I don't think we're even at the beginning of it, even with a Nest. My Nest doesn't communicate with my utility. My utility offers a time of use plan that I find suboptimal, and I haven't even signed up for it, even though I was on a time of use plan before I moved to where I am now. And I think that, you know, we saw that video yesterday morning. Was it Austin Energy? Was it your CEO that played a video yesterday morning?
I was here, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, we saw a video. I think it was the CEO of Austin Energy. It was showing.
Who was it? Direct Energy. Oh,
Direct
yes,
Energy.
right before the
Okay.
John Hugh and the whole
Thank you
gang.
for the correction. I thought that video was disappointing in the sense of, I think they positioned it as 20 years out. This is going to be the connected home, and they showed a few things. I hope we're a lot farther out in 20 years than what that video showed. That video showed where I think we should be in 5 years. But in terms of the connected home in 20 years, you know, there's a lack of vision there, and without better regulatory reform, we're not going to see the innovation that we need to see for a truly connected home.
I keep thinking that we have so many more opportunities than barriers. I'm still, I mean, and again, I moved to Austin by choice, right? I was in DC, I was working in the EU, I saw how behind the US was, and I was like, we need to work as soon as we can. We need to do it in Texas.
And there are a few outliers. You know, Chris mentioned 80-20. I view Texas and California as in the 20.
Well, you're in Georgia as well, and Georgia's really done a lot of great stuff.
You know,
They really have
not in terms of
NAVs
consumer empowerment.
That's fair.
There hasn't been. It's really been all on the distribution side.
Yeah, I think that it just varies from utility to utility, and not only, you know, the panel I moderated yesterday, there's also the challenge that utilities have of, even if you have a leader who has that vision, getting all the other stakeholders to come along with that vision can be a real challenge too, whether you're talking about employees within a utility or the regulators, if they have regulators, or investors, Wall Street. And that's one group that's really been missing from this conversation. We don't have Wall Street here talking about how do they value, you know, how do they view utilities in terms of what they're doing to be innovative, to own a customer relationship. That doesn't really factor in at this point.
Wall Street's involvement was what really allowed, in my personal perspective, taking off my AE hat, is what allowed solar to skyrocket. I mean, just look at
I think they
just look at the returns. I mean, once they pay attention, what we have is budget dust compared to what Wall Street
Budget
has.
dust.
So
They did the VC, they did the venture capital startups that were on an earlier panel today and some yesterday. So we have their indirect, their presence and spirit.
Yeah, well, we need are the analysts, you know, to talk about how they. But anyway, that's a completely different topic.
But
here.
you also said though that the utility thing, and honestly, I mean, the utility has billions of dollars, any utility, that they have spent money on infrastructure through capital investment budget, and then they need to legitimize that with FTEs. So most utilities don't have an R&D shop. They have people that ensure that they keep the lights on. We have linemen that risk their lives every day. And it's, for me, it is adding a whole IT layer to that is challenging, but doing it sort of like while you're fixing a plane mid-flight is a real tricky wicket. And so if I'm thinking about this objectively, I need to say to each one of the people here, what are the existing investments that we've already made in technology that you are going to create leapfrog technology around? We can't fix it for you. We have and it's not a guilt trip, it's an exhortation of truth. It's just, we are regulated or deregulated, whichever. We are not as nimble as you. You have the agility, the ability to constantly convene, and we have overworked, underpaid, undertrained, and two challenges, rust and wrenches.
So I'm not sure if I'm hearing the gauntlet thrown down or a plea for help from, or entities like ThinkEco and Tendril here. And,
I think we'd love to
how,
take up that mantle.
but really, what it is that, create the solution, make it relevant and useful to us. What problem are you solving?
Well, I
But
think
it
a
seems
lot
like
of
it
us
has to
are.
be very customized
Yeah.
then, doesn't it?
And I strongly
for
disagree.
vendors, your challenge is you need something that's very scalable that, can
So those
one
are
size
easily
can fit
solvable
all.
problems, right?
Right.
Micro-targeting for individual messaging and individual ROI calculations on every single message that you put in front of a user and making that infinitely scalable. Those are technology problems that are easy to solve. The harder things to solve are working with kind of within the pace and the things you're allowed to do inside a regulatory framework.
Yes.
And so I would love
Chewable
to
bites.
solve that problem, right? We are trying to solve that problem all day long, every day. But when when you're working under kind of some of the macroeconomic forces that regulated utilities work under, that gets more difficult, right? I mean, we can save. There are technology solutions out there that could save every person in America 25% on their consumption on an annual basis, all day long, every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But then, getting that approved and doing it on a mass scale and having to do state-by-state EM and V, and then, we actually only, the regulators only require us to do 3% EE, so we actually only want 3%. We don't want 3.1% because we're selling less of our core product, which is electrons. And so there are, until other larger things change, that's hard. That's going to remain a hard problem to solve.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think
simply put, it's who's going to pay for it at scale? And there's just not a good answer for that right now.
Right.
And I would say to that, every local context and precedent drives the decision-making of that utility more than market conditions that are outside of their control. So how decisions have been made in that community and how they've always been made informs their decision-making going forward more than any theoretical overlay you want to put on it or any purposeful storytelling that you want to apply to it. What we care about is what there does seem to be a disconnect with the ability to solve these problems and some utilities that succeed and others don't. And so when I hear, especially with the Wall Street conversation, when I used to hear people talking about friends that manage pension funds and stuff like that, they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's your golly gee shucks part of your portfolio. Ain't it good? Aren't you so good for supporting that? And I was like, maybe the way you invest in renewables and energy efficiency, but the way we do it, we get a payback. And we make sure, and we measure and validate that. And so I think to a lot of utilities, I'll say, do your work. No one can hide you. When you need to go up to the utility commission, truly no one can hide you. And so be ready and engage your customers actively.
What do you mean no one can hide you?
No one can hide you when your accounting is being reviewed by an independent third party.
So we've been talking a lot from, more or less what are the utilities supposed to do, but let's flip it around. And Patty, I'll start with you on this one because you spend your time studying consumers and their perceptions, their attitudes and behaviors. And then I also want to, get Bert in on this one too from his perspective. But do consumers want to be prosumers, that ability to produce electricity or produce negawatts through demand response, as well as being a consumer? Is that something that they want? Are you hearing them say that that's something they want to do? And then I'd like Bert to also answer, and then everyone else can jump in too.
Yes and no. Some do and some don't. Our segments show that people run a spectrum from the ones who care a lot about energy, whether it's green energy, renewables, to those who don't care at all, to those who care if it's convenient. And we've got 5 main segments, from concerned greens for the ones who care a lot, to the ones who just want to save money and will do whatever they can to save money. So they'll engage on programs that save them money, to those who are traditionalists, as we call them, who don't think there's any problem at all and nothing needs to happen. There's no worries about climate change or anything else, to a couple of other segments, young Americas, those who want to learn more. And so it just depends. Everyone's different. Obviously, utility can't create a program that's individualized for every single person. So you've got to create buckets or segments and then offer consumers what they want at the place they're at and what they care about.
Interesting. Bert, from your perspective, what do you see? And then I see we have a couple of your folks lining up for questions, excellent. I'd like to get you down here because we do want to do that before we run out of time here. So Bert, what's your perspective? And then let's open up for some audience questions.
Well, I think, most people don't really know what a prosumer is, so they wouldn't say they want to be one. But, I think the reality is I'm very much a student of distributed architecture for all of our infrastructure, not just power. Power and water are becoming critical. But prosumerism is a form of distributed economics. It means that people produce more of what they need themselves, and they decouple themselves then more from global economic events. And I think people truly do want that. So if they can get control of their energy bills, if they can get control of their water supply to some level to be able to make their own drinking water, if they can make themselves more resilient against natural disasters and political events, everybody is eager to do that.
Okay. Why don't we start with you, sir, ask your question. And for panelists, since we're getting short on time, please keep your answers concise.
One word, yes or no?
If you can manage that, that would be great, but no.
This actually isn't a yes or no question. It's y'all have all been talking about consumers and segmenting groups and such, but being a 18-year-old college student, I've never actually seen a utility bill because I live in a dorm after I moved out of my parents' house. So do y'all do any group studies on what those just becoming consumers for the first time? Like they've never seen the bills before, they don't understand it.
Or they lived in a group home or something like that. Yeah.
Right, like do y'all do studies? Is that just ignored because you're focusing on the massive group of 50s or 40-year-old people that are like your bulk of your consumers that have been consumers for a long time?
You want to hear what trips me out? You're defined as a low-income user. You, literally, because you are an 18-year-old kid, you make less than $50,000 a year, and you are thrown in a pile that is the most diverse pile in all of our markets. Is that the low-income user, it comes in every shape and color, and they all deal with different challenges. And so it's very interesting when we talk about segmenting. I strongly urge you to check out Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative because their work on sort of segmenting and sort of outlining what those markets are and sort of how you address needs is some of the best work that's been done yet.
Thank you.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Your segment is categorized, we call it Young America, and you're categorized in a group that wants to learn and will not engage until they know more. So I think we've identified your exact issue is you're just learning, you're just coming out of your parents' home or college, and you don't know. And so our advice to utilities is this group wants to know more, and you're not going to get them engaged on any of your programs until you work to educate this group.
That's right. So I'd give you first bit of advice: stay in college as long as you can. Avoid the real world as long as you can.
Already planned on that.
So I think the bill. Your question about the bill, I think is becoming less and less important. Obviously you need it in order to know what to write the check for, but the purpose of the bill, it serves twofold. One, and it's to get the utility paid, but two, it's to inform you how much you use. Well, they inform you how much you use in a way that is completely a black box to you. There's no way to say, okay, it's X number of kilowatt hours. No, yeah, that feels about right to me. Kilowatt hour is, you can't hold it in your hand. No one knows what it is. And so that part of its purpose needs to go away entirely. And there needs to be solutions that you're using all day long that allow you gas gauge life to know how you're using. And you can tie that back to things that you're doing in the home and how that's tracking to pricing programs and critical events and things like that, so that it now is, energy becomes real to you. Just like filling up your car, and when you're running out of gas, you know you need to put more gas in it, but you kind of feel like, yeah, I got about 300 miles, that feels about right. Energy needs the same kind of thing. And so I think the tools that companies like ourselves provide to allow you to understand what you're doing inside your home and get recommendations to use less and compare you to others that are similar are going to become more and more important, especially for the kind of the iPad generations, like you whippersnappers. Where they're used to more and more information.
Concise. Okay. Now let's turn to this lady over here, and then we'll go get that last question over there. And we'll be around if you have other questions in the audience that we won't get to in the interest of time right now. So please.
Hi. I can tell you I've been working in this industry for several years now. I know a couple of the panelists that are up here. And being a technology provider for this industry, or an innovative technology provider for this industry, is not for the faint of heart. It's you have to have some staying power. And that's a lot because we do treat these things very programmatically. Very few other industries treat it like that. You're relegated to a DR program or an EE program. The reality is that this commodity needs to be treated separately from the service or services that are offered on top of that. So to draw a very poor analogy to the Coke analogy earlier, Coca-Cola itself is a commodity, and if it were regulated, should be regulated separately from the service, the marketing that sells it to the consumer. And until we get to that kind of a paradigm, I doubt that the change will happen. So how do we get to a place, that's the question I have for these panelists who may not have the answer, but how do we get to a place where that is how we market? You know, the commodity is decoupled, and that can be regulated in the way that it's meant to be, and we move away and move into a much more service-focused framework.
I'll give a concise answer, and that is when we allow utilities and vendors to innovate, when the regulatory barriers are removed or changed so that innovation can happen and utilities and vendors can go to the market with solutions without it being having to be approved by a regulatory structure.
I would say transform the market through fundamentally exceptional work, and you can stand that way too.
Yeah, I'm more with Patty on this. I think the regulatory framework has to change in order to allow you to kind of provide those kinds of experiences. We talk a lot about regulated, deregulated. In the meantime, people are solving this problem, right? Comcast is now selling energy to the in their 4-pack, and solar providers are delighting their customers and making energy interesting to them, kind of the first time ever. And so we're going to continue talking about this for a long time. And meanwhile, customers are fleeing and going to things that are actually providing them real value. And so I think the regulatory environment has to change quickly so that people can start competing on normal market forces and be competitive.
Any comment, May or Bert, on that question before we go to the last one?
I agree with that, except for the fact that in this sector, somebody still has to take care of the infrastructure.
Yep.
So until that side is taken care of, it's just hard to make this a commodity that anybody can sell, because you'll end up with blackouts again, right? I mean, so
Exactly.
yeah, that's what
why
makes
I was
this
saying
hard.
add regulatory structures to allow innovation, but keep the regulatory regime that mandates reliability. That protects the infrastructure.
I think the current electrical system within, say, the next 10 years will look a lot like the wired phone system does now. So
Yes.
it doesn't
Yep.
matter how we market.
Good answer. I like that. Because the disruption's happening so quickly right now, and it's a when, not an if. Yeah, I agree.
Okay,
He's right.
our last questioner who's been patiently waiting. Thank you.
My question goes right straight to equity. I've heard it talked all around, but I want to know if you guys can tell me something that's going on now that is really targeting low-income people. They do not have the money to buy Energy Star appliances. They may not have the money to weatherize their homes. They may not own their homes. They're at the mercy of a landlord, a slumlord. That's where I'm from. My parents live in a small town in Texas. There are no jobs. There's very little income. Everybody is, making it on Social Security and government housing. So what kinds of things do you see to reach that last bit? Or are we planning on letting the tide raise all boats? Because often it does not.
My dad was, my dad's a single father. He taught in the South Bronx. He's blind, and we are of the same ilk. And I will say, I need to hit this because in the PJM market, we're talking about innovation and invention. But what we did was we worked with 13 different churches. This was before I was at Austin Energy. A group called Groundswell, which used to be DC Project, essentially worked across 13 different faith-based institutions across the region. None of them were well-to-do. Whole reason they were participating was their energy bill was about a third of their O&M cost, and they couldn't get through. And so what they had to do was they needed to find a way to aggregate and essentially become an aggregated group that will measure and verify negawatts, avoided energy consumption, and then sell that back onto the grid as aggregated amount. They were then sending that amount, and they were receiving the return on that, and they were distributing it across all the participating faith-based organizations that were then going in and repurposing the churches. They then would go in and they would talk about the stewardship. True faith-based stewardship of your community includes the environment. And that includes, we're taking care of this. At the point that you get pulpit to pews, you are educating people and you're informing them in a meaningful way that impacts their lives. And that is where I think the real change comes, is when people like you and I are willing to dedicate that extra 2 hours a week to ask that tough question, go through the temporary discomfort of helping everyone else, because no one else is going to do it for us. Everyone else has a moneyed interest driving that. So folks like you and I, that's who it is.
Okay, let's get a couple more, concise, and then we'll wrap up.
I can be concise.
Good.
So the Smart Grid Consumer Collaborative is publishing within about 3 weeks Spotlight on what we call Spotlight on Low-Income Consumers. And that is a deep dive we've taken on low-income consumers as defined by the census, by the U.S. Census. And so we're trying to find out, how does the digital divide adversely impact low-income consumers when it comes to smart grid technologies? We're finding out, are renters and people in multifamily homes able to take advantage of any programs, and if so, which ones? How do they get information? What do they think about their utility? We have a whole host of findings that we hope will drive policy and shape discussion around low-income consumers, because that's a really, really important group. That's concise.
Yes,
I
it
could
is.
say more, but I'll
Yes,
stop
thank
there.
you.
I'll
Anyone
add maybe
else?
one more thing. Completely agree with what both of these guys said, but maybe what wasn't said was it's not going to happen from the utility down. Because kind of going back to what Marie had said earlier, we think about things in very programmatic ways, right? So it's a DR program. Well, low-income homes don't have a large enough load to shed, so they're not going to be included in the DR program. EE, well, same thing. They're not consuming a lot, and therefore there's not enough of them to really move the needle on EE. And so when they have these kind of programmatic approaches, they're not thinking about their consumers as their customers, and they're instead thinking about them as kind of ratepayers, then that will, I think, always kind of fall through the cracks because it doesn't tick any of those boxes. And so it's going to I think if it's going to happen, as sad as it is to say, it has to happen kind of from the ground up, from a kind of a groundswell.
Okay.
Groundswell, great plug for the
Well,
group.
with that, we've gotten the hook a couple of times already, and I've ignored it. So thank you for your patience, John. Thank you, everyone. Please join me in thanking our panelists here. Wonderful discussion. Thank you so much.